everybody, it's Kelly from Let's Get Clacking, and in today's video we're going to go over using alcohol inks on outdoor vinyl. Now this was something that I made a couple of months ago, and it was a test to see how it worked, and this is alcohol inks on outdoor vinyl with no sealant on top, and obviously I've cut it with my Cameo. I've showed this to quite a few people and they've absolutely loved it and they've asked me to do a video, so this one is for you. What you will need for this tutorial is some outdoor white vinyl. Now what I've done is I've cut it into 30 by 30 blocks and had it flattened. Obviously vinyl comes in a roll, so it's a little bit difficult to work with when it's all curled up like that. So put it underneath a heavy book for a couple of days and it should be laying perfectly flat. This method is a bit of a low-cost method to making alcohol inks. As you can see, I've got a whole range to my left and they aren't in any labeled bottles or anything like that. Now this method is a method that I have seen on the internet somewhere, I can't remember exactly where. It's a method where you use Sharpies and rubbing alcohol to create your own alcohol inks. Alcohol inks are typically very expensive, so this is a really nice low-cost way of creating your own alcohol inks. Typically your alcohol inks are about 150 Rand each or 100 Rand each per color, but with this method you should be able to get away with around 600 Rand for, 24 or maybe 700 Rand for a 24 ink set. I used the Discam rubbing alcohol, the 91% for this, but you can use 99% as well, that works just fine. And I use just the standard Sharpies. Now you need to make sure they're not the oil-based Sharpies, these are just the normal ones. You also need some spray bottles to put your alcohol inks into, like I have. You can get these at most plastic shops. They're normally a couple of Rand each, not very expensive, maybe 2 Rand 50, maybe 5 Rand, depending somewhere around there. And for the crafting part of this tutorial, I would recommend some latex gloves. And another item that I would recommend is a heat gun or a straw. Well, let's get clacking.
Alright, so first of all, we need to start with making our alcohol inks. So we take our Sharpie pen and a spray bottle that is almost empty, or that has nothing in it. And what we do is we need to take it apart. So you can take the lid off, grab a pair of pliers, and we need to take this part off. So this part comes apart, we just wiggle it and then it comes off. And then there's this part on the inside. So we can open our bottle and we take it. You can use gloves if you want for this section. I normally don't because it's okay. This part, the outside part's not normally very colorful. And then you literally just pop it into the bottle. And if you want to go a step further, you can also take the nib out and pop the nib into the bottle as well. And you'll see there at the bottom, with that tiny little bit of alcohol ink that we have in there, how it's already started absorbing the color. And that's essentially all that it does. Then we take our alcohol ink. I would recommend using a funnel for this. I don't have one right here, so that's all right. And you can just pour the alcohol ink into the bottle. Bearing in mind that the amount of alcohol that you pour into the bottle will mean how diluted the pigment is. Obviously, if you fill it up all the way to the top, then your pigment might be a little bit less concentrated, but if you don't pour all that much, then it'll probably be quite intense, which if it's what you want, then that's great. It might be a little bit hard to close the bottle because that part is in the way, but you can just give it a little bit of force and it will close no problem. I typically wait about a day before using this, just because you really want the alcohol ink to pull the pigment out of the part of the Sharpie. If you want to, you can even take this out and then turn it around and then put it back in, because it might not have pulled all of the ink from the top colors. But we're not going to use this color in this video now, so I'm going to be using reds and things like that. So I'm going to put this aside and then we can get started. I like to use some black sheeting or some black plastic to keep my work surface clean. Because alcohol ink can kind of get everywhere, so that's just one thing to be aware of. And then what you can do is you can tape it down on the corners just to make sure that it's not going to lift up. Now that the work surface is taped down, we can start with step 2, which is to cover it with some newspaper so that it absorbs everything. As you can see, I've used this newspaper for alcohol inks before, so reduce, reuse, recycle. You can tape this down as well if you like, and then just reuse it for next time. Now that our work surface is prepped, we have our 12 by 12 vinyl on. I have my heat gun at the ready, which we can use to move the alcohol ink around the page. I also have some pipettes that I like to use to suck the ink up out of the bottle and to kind of spray it around a little bit. I find it a little bit easier to manage. So I've got a couple of these for different colors. So in the spirit of Valentine's Day, oh, I know for some, I'm going to be using reds and purples. So I've got a little bit of a magenta color, more of a red, like a burnt red or a burnt orange, somewhere around there. I also like to keep a bottle of just plain alcohol ink nearby, just in case I want to dilute anything or spread it around a little bit more. I find that this helps as well. But of course, whatever color combination you want to use, go for it, and then you pretty much just see how it turns out. You kind of splish everything around the page, and there you go. I'm going to turn my fan on. The fumes do get quite hectic if you're not careful, so I like to have the fan on just to kind of try and help me breathe, because I'm obviously in a room and not outside. I do recommend doing this in a well-ventilated area. I will also be putting gloves on because that stuff gets all over your fingers. So we're ready to begin. I'm going to start by opening the bottles and putting them off to the side just to get the excess off. This is one method that you could use, kind of splotching things around. It only really works when there's liquid in the string, in that thingy. Please be very careful when you're putting your alcohol inks off to the side. I have accidentally knocked them over before, which is fine if it's the clear one, but not if it's the colors one, because those ones don't come out. Obviously when you're doing this as well, it gives you a nice indication of what the colors look like. What you can do once the Sharpies have all extracted is to actually remove the Sharpies from the bottles. I find that to be a bit difficult sometimes, so I just leave them in there, but obviously then it's a little bit more difficult to work with. So you suck up some of the ink into the pipette and you kind of splish it around. This is a great fun art piece because there's no real method to all of this, so you kind of just splish it. You want to kind of do it a little bit carefully, because obviously too much on the paper can become a little bit difficult to handle. Or if you have a very dark color and you have too much of the dark color, it can actually completely take over. Like I find that the purple is very much a takeover kind of color. So the pinks and whatnot, you can, and the oranges and the yellows, you can have a little bit more of them because they don't take over as much. But the purple annihilates everything. You can see the colors have already kind of started melding together. This one I'm going to try and do very little of because it's very dark. Okay, now comes some of the fun stuff. So I'm going to put that away. We can take our heat gun and start moving everything around. Okay, so you can see how it started to give us lines and things like that. Now what you can do if you want to, if there's a particular area that you don't really like, that you want to kind of go over, you can just use the clear one and spray over it. Then if you want to go over with another layer of color, you can do that. And I'm really liking this color that's coming out in the alcohol inks, so I'm going to use some of that. I'm not going to use any more of the other one. Just giving it a little bit of a breather because the heat gun obviously gets very hot. If you want to rather use a hairdryer, that also works. It might be a little bit easier to control the heat anyway, but I wouldn't worry too much about using a heat gun. As you can see, it works perfectly. So what we can do is, if we see areas that we don't really like, to be honest, I'm not seeing many because I'm kind of loving this. So what I'm doing, like as an example, to get these sections here, you move the heat gun in a circular position. So what it does is it pushes the alcohol ink around, because obviously you're pushing the ink around and then it's collecting and drying at the edges. So you want to kind of push the heat gun like that to try and make sure that you get those edges, if that's what you want. If you want more of the tendrils, then go at more of an angle and shoot it across the page. You kind of want to steer the ink in a certain direction. And then if you want very soft kind of edges, then bring the heat gun further up so that it doesn't have as much of a push. If you want very harsh edges, then bring it a little bit closer to the vinyl, so that you have these harsher edges. And then obviously we get sections like this where it hasn't quite dried, so what we can do to kind of move it around a little bit more, so we can spray it and give it another go. Giving a little bit of a cool down. I think that's looking stunning so far. And again, that's what I love about this kind of art, because it's kind of, you do whatever and it looks amazing. A little bit more lighter colors. And what I like to do with the spray at the end, as you can see, it kind of gives it this very mottled effect, and I think that looks beautiful. So sometimes I give it a little bit of a spray just to kind of bring out that mottle, and it lightens some of the colors sometimes, which is also very nice. And that I don't use with a heat gun afterwards, I just kind of let it dry sometimes. So that's pretty much how I do this step. The next step is very easy, which is just going to be feeding it or putting it on the cutting mat, running it through the Cameo, and cutting something out of this. What I did do with one of my other designs was I waited for it to completely dry, and then I covered it with clear vinyl, adhesive vinyl, so that it would kind of seal it in. Another option is to also put a glaze over it, so you can get a glaze from Builder's Warehouse. It's a glazing spray that you get from Rust-Oleum, and you can just spray it over on top to seal it, and then you can cut it like that. Also, you need to wait for the glaze to be completely dry before you cut it, but I normally just use the clear vinyl route. It's quicker, it's much easier for me. I know that some of you are probably wondering why I use the pipettes with my bottles. When I first made these, I bought the incorrect bottle. As you can see, it is a squirt cap. So what happens when you squirt it onto the canvas, or onto the vinyl rather, it kind of splats everywhere, and it obviously, alcohol ink is very difficult to get off of most surfaces, so you kind of struggle to get it off, and then you end up staining those things. So I just use the pipettes rather. It depends on what the kind of effect that you're going for. As you can see with what we did with the plain alcohol ink, it leaves marks everywhere. So if that's not the kind of look that you're going for, which for me is not really what I was going for, which is why I bought the squirty bottles, I would then rather suggest using the pipettes, because you can have much more control over what goes where. As you could see, like we could say, okay, we want a little more pink there, a little bit more red there, a little bit more dark red over here, and that works. But you can't do that with these bottles or with the spray ones. So yeah, hope that helps. The design is dry, and I have my clear adhesive. I'm going to put that on top of the design, and I have my scraper to try and make sure that I get out all the bubbles. So we now have our design that has been essentially laminated, which means that it can get a little bit of water on it and it won't die, essentially. I'm actually going to load this onto the Cameo mat, and I'm going to cut a design that I've designed myself, entirely myself. I'm very proud, very excited to, and I'm going to share it with you as well. So it is a heart, so I'm going to be loading it like this so that I can cut the design like that, because that's generally where everything should go. I'm very keen to see what it looks like.
Our finished product. I'm really thrilled with how this turned out. I will share a link to this design in the description. It's obviously a design that I completely made myself, so I'm happy to share it with you guys if you want to use it for a Valentine's Day project. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, as it really helps my channel to grow. If you would like to subscribe to my channel, you'll be able to do so on this side. On this side, YouTube will show you my latest video, and just below that, it will show you something that they think that you'll enjoy. I'll see you next time, and remember, be kind to someone today. Bye!